Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications. AI is supposed to make marketing teams faster, smarter, and more efficient. So why do so many teams feel more overwhelmed than ever? Today, we're digging into what's really happening behind the push for AI adoption, including where it's being misapplied, how to identify the inefficiencies it is exposing, and how to shift your role so you are creating strategic value instead of just increasing output. If your team is moving faster but not getting better results, this conversation will help you understand why and what to do next. Today's guest is Preston Zeller, who works at the intersection of AI operations and modern marketing strategy. He brings a sharp, real-world perspective on how teams are actually using AI and where they are getting it wrong.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the show, Preston.
Lori, I appreciate you having me on. It's great to be with you.
Oh my gosh, this is such a meaty topic. And it's so interesting when I ask people about their background. Really, AI is like such a new part of the background, right? But tell us about the background and then really how the intersection of AI fits so well.
Yeah, well, I've sat at the sort of intersection of, adopting new tools and pushing those to their limits since about 2010, which is, I think right when a lot of, legacy tools we might call today started becoming a lot more well-known, and different optimization apps started coming online and enabling marketers in particular from being beholden to developers kind of as often as they would. And so I spent a lot of my time at, in different small agencies, and then eventually ended up in the high growth SaaS world. So ZoomInfo, and then A Cloud Guru, which got bought by Pluralsight. And then actually at a MarTech stack company. It was more like a RevOps probably agency you'd call it now. And then most recently I spent about 3.5 years as CGO at a real estate data and technology company. So, I joined there, and that was interesting because it was 2022, and it was right when the economy started changing, and also when, this new, more mainstream version of AI started becoming more popular. Right. And so figuring out, how do you actually apply this thing in a meaningful way, and then seeing what you can do beyond just I think the standard applications that have become table stakes, where does it go from there? So.
Right. And it's interesting because you're talking about applying AI, but a lot of people are applying AI before they've even defined the problem it is that they're trying to solve. They're just looking at it as another arrow in the quiver to get something done quick. What does that really look like in practice?
Well, I think marketers we're inundated with wearing even more hats now, and this pressure of, I think it's shifted so much from, this overall storytelling and the long, kind of a mix of the short-term and long-term gains with everything is short-term, and, your capital stakeholders or your executives at the top are so focused on margins, and we have been in a weird economy. And so there's been this tendency to just throw budget at AI tools to marketers to say, hey, go figure out how to do this, be more productive, do more things, without even, I think, the executives really knowing what that means. I do believe that's shifting to some degree, but I don't doubt there's people in many different kinds of roles where they're just stuck with tools, and they're like, okay, I guess I'll go be more productive, and they have to level up. And especially if you're mid-career or something like that, you might be going, well, I thought I knew what I was doing. And then this AI has changed a lot of that.
Yeah, it has. And the thing that's interesting here is, if let's put our ops, hats on for a minute. And when we are thinking through a product launch or an expansion, what we're thinking through are the operational needs that we have in order to meet that expansion. And what we're also establishing are inefficiencies that we might have within the team or at the table. And sometimes those involve people, sometimes they involve tools. But people are approaching it completely opposite with AI. They're not looking at inefficiencies that they might have in the operation. They're looking at it as a way to do something quicker or faster, just really speed, instead of what can we do to adopt a critical path to an end and get there, with more speed, agility, and better ROI. It's like they're not looking at AI as a strategic tool. They're looking at it as a stopgap measure.
Yeah, well, it's to add to what you're saying, it's viewed as this like bolt-on versus a paradigm shift. It's almost like, if you were selling a brick and mortar back in like 99 and the internet started becoming a thing more, and you were like, well, I guess we'll just like kind of add the internet to what we're doing. Like, no, it's a pivotal kind of shift in what you're doing. And I think, part of the hard thing is, do organizations want to slow down enough to say, okay, hey, how can we sort of rethink the way that we do go to market and the kinds of processes we use, or are we just sticking to our old behaviors and trying to plug different tools in ad hoc? And somebody has to be willing to take the reins and do the research, maybe outside of even your normal hours, to say, hey, I've looked into XYZ tools or methodologies with AI, and this is how it can actually improve our efficiency in doing it, but also give us better insights in how we go to market too. And I think these things aren't all mutually exclusive, but you do have to slow down enough and level up enough, especially people listening who think that they had it figured out and are now going, I don't want to address the big elephant in the room of you might have to rewrite your playbook.
Well, and I think that unspoken anxiety that you're talking about is a very, very real thing. How do you see that showing up across marketing teams?
Well, I think there's the potential reluctance of, I think AI is going to replace my job, which we could address that kind of notion in a moment. But then, like, regardless if you're an IC or you're a leader, well, on the leadership standpoint, go and be an innovator in your space instead of just like a manager of the existing things. And most leaders should know the difference by now, but if you don't, like, there is that big difference of leadership versus management. But if you're an IC, I think you have an incredible opportunity, or even a manager of a small team, you have an incredible opportunity in front of you to go, and you have to tinker on your own. I think that's one of the big things. It can't just be, I got to work, I did my stuff, and I left. That's fine. I'm sure it'll check the box. But the amount of tooling and different methodologies coming out is really kind of breakneck. And so, do the research you need to and actually put these things to use. And whether it's your main thing or a side project, whatever it is, like, you have to experiment more than maybe you're comfortable with or used to.
Yeah. And I think that experimentation is really, really important, especially because we're all kind of learning it at one time together, right?
Yeah.
Experimentation, curiosity, call it curiosity. But I also feel that there are a lot of marketers still holding themselves back when it comes to evolving those skill sets. Why is it? Is it ego? Is it, is it the tech stack is too deep already? The bolt-on is just going to be too difficult? What is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one could be, maybe you got into tech because it's traditionally paid a lot better than other sectors. So you're like, maybe that was your motivation.
Yeah.
So this is going to, like, check a lot of people's motivation in terms of why they're actually in, at least the tech marketing space. But I think there's that fear of, if I go and do something so great that I'm deemed as no longer useful because maybe I've replaced myself with this process, then, I might lose my job, which, like, I'm not going to say that's not true, But I would argue actually the opposite. It actually makes you a lot more valuable. And anyone worth their salt who is a leader in an organization is going to look at someone who can create a process to displace you, is going to look for you to be able to see what other opportunities there are on the horizon.
Right.
With AI, because every organization or most organizations are like looking at AI to some degree there. So like the more you have this sort of protective avoidant shell around your role and a reluctance to kind of integrate it, that's not going to help you in the long run. And I can say I had people on my team in the past 3 years where like I said, hey, like I had evaluated the tool, I said, go use it. And it was just like, they sandbagged it because they thought I was trying to replace it. I'm like, no, I want you to work on more important things and not be bogged down by this thing I know you have to do that's pretty manual. So
Yeah. Well, I think it ties into the architect of what that thing might do, right? And in order to architect something within AI, you've got to be incredibly strategic. It's not just putting a couple blurbs in and expecting it to work. I've said this before, crap in, crap out. And the best strategic outcomes with AI have the best strategic foundation that they are built upon. So really what it boils down to is if you are a marketer who is truly tactical and just executing day in and day out versus a marketer who is a strategist and can truly architect and think through great ways to make great things happen, that's going to be the key difference in whether or not you last or not.
Yeah. Well, and not, I think not pigeonholing yourself into a certain way of operating as well. I mean, we talked about this on one of our previous calls of like custom GPTs and how that was like a big thing a year and a half ago, but how much things have evolved since then. And particularly since the beginning of the year with the new models that came out between Codex and Claude, Claude's different models really amping up what you can do, not just in Claude and Claude Cowork, but also Claude Code and the different things we could get into there. But it's empowered people in a way that we don't even realize how big it is yet. But people who go in there and start, stitching together skills, and I'm using Paperclip right now that I could talk about too. That's a whole nother wild thing, but it's autonomous agents working on teams, talking to each other. It's kind of like OpenClaw. So those things that help you become more of an orchestrator, if you set it up right. And as you said,
Right.
it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. And so it's not like, let me just turn on these things and I'll go, screw around for 4 hours. It's like, no, you can, it's a paradigm shift in the way you work. That's
Yeah,
what
it really is. So let's talk about how you do it. Let's talk about really what the best marketers in the world are doing, including you, Preston, to really make a difference in AI and growth and revenue churning programs. So the operational audit, that truly is where everyone needs to start and really finding those bottlenecks that might be existing. Before teams even touch AI, you recommend this. What exactly does that involve?
From the operational standpoint, well, look at the things that are an inhibitor to executing on campaigns. And for marketers, historically, that's been dev teams, or it's been maybe a developer who sits in marketing, if you're fortunate enough to have that. But that also, where is your tracking still lacking? And because why those things matter, and I'm pinpointing those, the ability to launch new campaign assets. And so like get into more of an iterative testing phase versus everything needs to be this grand rollout. But then also from the data standpoint, because there are more like MCPs that you can connect to now to actually help you analyze this data and find trends and patterns. If you don't have your product and website properly instrumented, then it is going to be fairly useless to try to do this kind of analysis. So you have to have the right events and attributes on those events to be able to do that analysis. So being able to get with your product team or your internal developer for marketing and instrumenting those things correctly, that's I think a simple ops thing that you could look at as well. And then of course how like different sales information and stages there for more B2B side are coming back into a repository that you can tap into.
I love that. And we're a strategy firm, and then we implement the strategies that we deploy or that we develop. So we're looking at things like, where are we making decisions without real competitor intelligence?
Mm-hmm.
Where are we missing or have underutilizing data? What workflows are still manual and should not be? Where are we overpaying for insights and tools?
Mm-hmm.
And what is slowing down speed to market?
Yeah. So, okay, I'll throw out one example here that really kind of changed the game for me. And that is a combination of competitor intelligence and then like a full breakdown of, your own funnel and then how you make sense of all that. So in Claude Code, I was able to connect data for SEO, which is has a combination of the LLM, how brands are getting mentioned in LLMs, of course, the SERPs, the AdWord information, all that kind of stuff, right? So you pull that in, and you have it compared against like whatever 2, 3, 4 competitors, however you want to do that, and then use Firecrawl and pull in the actual page content that is being referenced in those places. But then you combine that with skills, and there's a number of different skills out there that you can load into Claude Code to make sense of all this data. And one of the examples of that, and this wasn't just like an audit of one of the sites I was working on in the funnel, but it was also going, hey, look at the LLM mentions, go into those actual forums, see what is being cited, see where I need to show up and how I can actually be mentioned there. Because people may think, oh, I need to just go comment in Reddit. Well, no, there's actual like seasoned Reddit forums or posts that may actually be getting the weight, not just any old mention in Reddit. So that right there gives you a targeted place to go that's not just kind of spray and pray, or whether it's a YouTube video or that kind of thing. But that all like cut down the time and the guesswork very quickly. I mean, this is all research that took place in like 15, 20 minutes. That was mostly, once it was all set up, it was a matter of, asking the right questions.
What do you think is the most, what's the low-hanging fruit? Where can most marketers start? I mean, that is very complicated and very sophisticated and technical, and talk about architecture, very strategic as well. Where do you see, what would be an even playing field that no matter what, every marketer needs to be considering as the next step?
I mean, Claude Cowork would be, because they've continued to load different tools in there. So I had a market research and pricing report from late last year that I loaded into Claude Cowork when I had it do a separate analysis. And this is just like, I think their market research skill that they have just like already done, right? I don't have to configure anything. I just called it up in Cowork and I gave it the whole report, right? And it spit out like a well presented and articulated PDF that gave me the insights I needed to be able to continue to take action on that. And it was slightly better than the one I had done prior, but the one I had done prior, I had to do a lot more like specific questioning to make it done. So I think Claude Cowork is phenomenal in that regard. And you can schedule tasks in Claude Cowork to, every morning or whatever it may be, do different kinds of reports for you.
What about GTM movement? What are you seeing there regarding really connecting the dots and just providing more automation and insight along the way?
I think we're still pretty early in that, partially because of the story that I told you before this with connecting to MCPs and stuff. And this, I think, speaks to, in the marketing realm, I think you tend to have, people that are more creative and more analytical, and then you have kind of the engineering brain on the other side. But if you, I think, really want to wrap your arms around what's possible in, I think how you go to market and being able to aggregate data, and again, the stuff you could look up tons of YouTube videos on how to connect it. you have to get your hands a bit more dirty in the technical realm. And that's not to say you're becoming a developer. It's not that at all. You have developers who are writing code manually, even less now. It's just the concepts that you need to kind of lean into. And once you connect one of these data sets for the first time, it just opens up your world as to the possibilities.
What is the most surprising example that you've seen that you were like, oh my God, that's amazing?
It was actually middle of last year, and this is less a go-to-market example, but it gave me an idea of the potential for MCPs. I created an MCP for this real estate data set for a data company I was at, and that world in the investor space is dominated by UI that you have to interact with, and so I loaded this MCP into Claude and I said, hey, I'm a real estate investor. Here's my criteria. Compare these two cities. Give me the top, investments for that city, and then give me a cold calling script. And I made a video about this that's out there somewhere. And it did that, and it went even deeper, and it created, based on the distress factors of those homes, created like a really nuanced cold calling script around it. And that was like 10 months ago, something like that. But I think that, and just the some of the stuff with the LLM mentions that I told a bit earlier, that was really eye-opening, because I did have this impression before of, I just need to post on Reddit.
Yeah.
That's not really true. And so there's, I think you start to get a lot more nuanced insight into what is actually working. And you can plug these things into your ad platforms as well. I think that's another huge opportunity if that's your focus.
I was listening to a show yesterday, and they were talking about, from an operational standpoint, a company, a high growth company, who has quite a bit of investment on the table from PEs, and they've got the infrastructure, the operational infrastructure that they're building the business on is really all AI. Mm-hmm. And AI was starting to realize that this company was going to run out of money. So AI made the decision that this company needed some cryptocurrency in order to backfill what they thought was going to be a gap. So AI, the system, is going out to market without human beings knowing it, soliciting cryptocurrency. Cybersecurity sees a flurry of activity in the area. They back up. They're like, what is going on here? And they realize that their AI system is completely rogue, and they've got to, kind of shut things down.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest, that we've been talking about that, for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. The same thing can happen in marketing with automations, with the type of messages that we're sending out. The fear is AI better adept at doing that, or is the human intellect better adept at doing that? And it's a concern, though, because if all of our automations, if we can customize thousands of automations in a day, as people are coming through the funnel, then based on the example I just told you, those marketing AI systems could go rogue as well. And who knows what kind of messaging they could be sending out.
Right. And that's where it still needs to be very much human in the loop. There are some things that, so this is where like N8N or like very deterministic workflows are better for a lot of things. Like in my previous role, we created a billing sequence because we just didn't have a complex billing program set up or software onboarded, but we created an N8N sequence that actually solved what we needed. And it was like, it either worked or it didn't, or aired out, but it wasn't making up invoices, right? And that's where, again, having an approval layer in there. So I mentioned Paperclip. Paperclip is this even more kind of bleeding edge thing where you'll create your different agents that are just collaborating with each other, and it's pretty bonkers to see all happening.
Wow.
It sounds like they plugged it into some kind of financial strategy, which is pretty gnarly. But still, you can create those, approval barriers to say, well, this is like board approval or whatever, board approval in that context. So I think you do have to be super cognizant and QAing the work that's coming out of there still.
What is the typical mix of human to AI agent right now on a real sophisticated marketing team?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question because I could go create, 5 agents that are collaborating, but then there's this notion that you might have hundreds of agents that are doing all sorts of things. So, I mean, I still think we're so early in the adoption of this because, again, there's the technical side of it. There's what does the company actually resource? I have a good friend who leads sales at a huge publicly traded company, and they're like a super closed down version of Copilot, right? So they're nowhere near creating any kind of agents. It's very locked down, which I understand in that context. But this is where starting to tinker outside of the bounds of just like maybe what your role is, if you're at a company that's going to limit you, and seeing what the possibilities are, that allows you to go back into your company and go, hey, I found a new possible, and here's what it is. And maybe they listen, maybe they don't, but that's a skill then that like can't be taken away from you. So I think it behooves you to go start figuring out like how can you then, harness these agents or these different tools in new ways.
So this is definitely a forward-leaning and forward-thinking episode today on some incredibly innovative approaches when it comes to AI for marketing teams. So we're going to play a little fill-in-the-blank question because I don't want people feeling overwhelmed that they're so far behind. So if you are not doing X, you are absolutely behind in your AI implementation.
I think if you're not exploring Claude Code right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so we've deduced it all down to Claude Code. I think it's wonderful. So what would be a goal that someone should establish regarding Claude Code in the next 3 months?
So get at least, I'd get their $100 subscription and think of a problem at work that you have not been able to solve, and then start asking Claude Code to explain the problem and say, help me. How would you help me solve this?
Yeah.
That's it. There's so many other things I could say there, but just try that as a starter. Because the thing that people need to understand is that Claude Code is going to be fundamentally different in how it's going to approach your problem than if you're just in ChatGPT or whatever, and even just regular Claude, because it's basically approaching it from a coding standpoint. That's what it's there to do. Yes, it's using the same kind of model like Opus, but its approach is going to be, okay, you're going to create something, not just produce a PDF or whatnot. So
that's fantastic.
It's breaking past, I think another way to put it, it's breaking past the sort of just dialogue into the creation of something. And maybe it's helping you just create a workflow. Maybe it's a just micro app, whatever it is. And asking it, hey, where should I host this? Where should I push this?
So what is your goal for the next 3 months?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm for one, I'm continuing to grow my main product, which is SalmLog. So, but then the other is I also do work with companies from time to time. So, I think continuing to see what kind of, problems businesses are trying to solve, and seeing how I can help them do that. And then just I'm really fascinated by the paperclip and that whole genre of things. It's sort of like the zero employee business. That whole idea has taken off. I don't really think it's zero employee ultimately, but how you have these groups of agents working together and collaborating based on your direction. It is, again, a whole nother world of paradigm shift. And that's when you hear other people who are more much more prominent in this space, like Dario or whoever, talking about where jobs are going in many ways. That's one of the things they'll say is like you'll have people creating agents and innovating on that, and then you'll have people managing agents. That's like the binary they say. But,
yeah, I love it. Fantastic. I tell you, Preston, such incredible insight. And so it's not futuristic thinking for you, but it's futuristic thinking for a lot of marketers out there today. So I really, really appreciate the strategic insights that you've shared with us. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Just look me up on LinkedIn, Preston Zeller. Easy to find there.
Which is much easier to find than Lori Sartorius-Jones. But that's where you can find me as well, everyone. Preston, thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thanks, Lori.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.